4 days apart, America presented the world with two very different pictures of presidential power. In Chicago, Barack Obama opened a center devoted to history, citizenship, community, and the idea that democracy belongs to everyone.
And in Washington, Donald Trump erected a UFC cage on the south lawn of the White House for his 80th birthday party. One former president opened the doors to a civic institution. The current president turned the People's House into a fight venue.
Listen, Obama built a legacy.
Trump built a cage.
And honestly, you could probably end the video right here, because those two images tell us more about the state of the U.S. than another 100 speeches about American greatness. This is about something more fundamental. What does a president believe the presidency is for? Is it an institution you temporarily inherit and eventually pass on? Or is it a personal stage that exists to promote your name, your friends, and your brand?
Because the contrast in Chicago was extraordinary. Bill Clinton was there, George W. Bush was there, Joe Biden was there, Angela Merkel was there from Germany, Justin Trudeau came from Canada. There was political leaders, artists, musicians, and thousands of visitors gathering on Chicago's south side. Every living American president was represented in that room except Donald Trump.
And listen, Bush being there, that matters. This was not simply a Democratic Party reunion where everybody agreed with everybody else. George W. Bush and Barack Obama fought elections on opposite sides. They governed differently and disagreed on major issues. But Bush still understood the occasion as something larger than one political party.
Because that is how democratic tradition is supposed to work. You compete. You criticize, you win or you lose, and then eventually you recognize that the institution matters more than any one person occupying it.
The Obama Presidential Center is not just a giant building with Obama's name on it. The campus contains a museum, public library, parkland, walking trails, a playground, performance spaces, and an athletic center. It was designed as somewhere people would actually use, not simply somewhere where they'd stand outside and admire a former president.
And that's the point of the place. It represents Obama's presidency as one chapter in a continuing Democratic story.
And then, 4 days earlier, what happens? Well, there's the White House.
A professional cage fighting event was staged on the South Lawn, surrounded by corporate sponsors, giant television screens, and thousands of invited spectators. Trump walked towards the cage beside UFC boss Dana White and later stood inside the octagon with members of his family, of course.
And listen, this isn't an attack on the sport. Tons of people love UFC, and that's great. But the question here is why the president needed to place the cage on the White House lawn. Why did the official residence of the American presidency need to become the backdrop for Donald Trump's birthday spectacle?
Especially when Trump recently disclosed owning shares of the UFC's parent company. And only 16% of Americans surveyed approved of holding the event at the White House. But the event went ahead because public approval was never the point in a Trump world. It's always the spectacle that's the point.
The White House was no longer acting as the symbolic home of every American. For one evening, well, even more maybe, it became Trump's personal luxury box. And once you see that, the other stories from Washington stop looking like unrelated bits of weirdness.
Yeah, Trump had his name attached to the Kennedy Center, an institution created by Congress as a memorial to JFK. The name stayed there for less than 6 months before the federal judge ruled that the board did not have the authority to rename it. And workers removed Trump's letters during a pre-dawn operation. They wanted him out of there.
Think about that image, though. Trump could not wait for history to decide what his cultural legacy would be. He had his name screwed onto somebody else's memorial while he was still president. And then a court made him take it down.
Meanwhile, his newly renovated Lincoln Memorial reflecting pool began turning green, getting algae, and peeling less than 2 weeks after Trump announced the work was finished. This was a $14.7 million no-bid renovation, and Trump promoted it as part of his transformation of Washington.
Well, the paint was literally coming off the bottom of the reflecting pool before the administration had even finished celebrating the paint job. Now, let me tell you, that metaphor did not even have the decency to be subtle. It was right in your face.
And let's not forget, behind the White House sits the enormous ballroom project that Trump repeatedly said would be funded privately. Well, new reporting says that his administration redirected $352 million originally designated to Secret Service purposes. Now that money is going to the broader ballroom modernization project. And you know who pays for that? Taxpayers.
So let's actually look at the physical architecture of his presidency. A ballroom under construction, a reflecting pool peeling apart, a name removed from the Kennedy Center, and a cage erected on the White House lawn.
These are not simply embarrassing visuals. They reveal what Trump thinks power looks like. Power in Trump's world is your name in giant letters, private donors, television ratings, and thousands of people watching you enter an arena. It is dominating the picture even when nothing lasting exists beyond the picture.
Obama's speech in Chicago offered almost the exact opposite definition. He talked about peaceful transfers of power, a military serving the Constitution rather than one individual, personal character, and the responsibilities that people share as citizens.
He talked about America being strongest when it cooperates with other countries instead of trying to dominate, bully, and squeeze every possible advantage from them. And sitting in that audience were former leaders who had experienced both versions of American power.
Angela Merkel knew what it was like to disagree with Obama. Justin Trudeau knew what it was like to disagree with Obama. They were not in Chicago because those relationships had always been easy.
No, they were there because disagreement is not the same thing as instability. You can argue with an ally and still believe the agreement will exist tomorrow. You can have an ugly meeting and still believe the larger relationship has rules. And you can still respect the institution.
And that is the strongest part of the argument that Obama originally built. There is a hard difference between a difficult ally and an unreliable one.
Hey, difficult is normal. Canada and the United States have argued over lumber, dairy, pipelines, defense spending, and trade for generations. That's what neighboring countries do.
But unreliable means the rules themselves can change according to one man's mood. It means a treaty that was described as the greatest deal in history can suddenly be treated as worthless by the same person who signed it.
It also means a Canadian auto supplier, forester company, or farmer cannot simply calculate normal business risks anymore. They have to calculate Donald Trump risk, whether a social media post, birthday rally, or a press conference might suddenly change the conditions under which they operate.
And this is why the room in Chicago matters to Canada. Not because Canada wants Barack Obama back in the White House. That's just not an option. And nostalgia is not a foreign policy.
I wish so. But it matters because trust is a form of power. When Angela Merkel and Justin Trudeau voluntarily traveled to Chicago to honor a former American president, that tells you something about the relationship he retained after leaving office.
Yet nobody had to threaten them with tariffs to make them appear. Nobody had to warn them that failing to attend would have consequences. They chose to be there.
And that is what soft power actually means. It sounds vague until you lose it. Then suddenly your allies are signing contracts elsewhere, building defense systems without you, and holding important conversation in rooms where you no longer have a seat.
Trump can force himself into almost any discussion because the United States remains enormously powerful. He can threaten tariffs, he can demand concessions, he can make other countries pay attention to him. But attention is not respect. Fear is not loyalty. And making another country accept one demand does not mean that that country will choose you again when it has an alternative.
Exactly. And this is the calculation Mark Carney's government is now making. Canada must continue working with the United States because geography, trade, families, and security tie our countries together. Hey, pretending otherwise, that would just be ridiculous.
But Canada cannot build its entire future around the hope that the person in the White House will behave predictably. We need European customers, Asian partnerships, stronger domestic industries, and deeper relationships with other middle power.
This is the insurance we need against an American presidency that has become inseparable from one man's personality.
And Canadians should also pay attention to the domestic lesson as well. This political style does not stop at the border. The idea that government is entertainment, institutions are personal property, and every public asset should carry the leader's branding is already being copied elsewhere.
So the warning is not that Canada will suddenly have a cage fight on Parliament Hill next Tuesday, although let's not give anyone any ideas. The warning is still that institutions can slowly become props. Public service becomes political theater, and history becomes whatever the person currently holding power says it is.
Think about it. Once everything becomes performance, governing becomes secondary. It doesn't matter whether the reflecting pool works if the announcement looked good. It doesn't matter whether the ballroom is properly funded if the renderings look expensive. It doesn't matter whether the Kennedy Center legally carries your name if the leathers can be installed before anybody stops you.
Barack Obama's center carries his name too, obviously. But presidential libraries and centers are a long American tradition, generally built after the president leaves office to preserve records, examine decisions, and create a public account of that presidency.
Trump tried to add his name to an existing national memorial while he's still serving as president. It's not preserving history, people. That's trying to get ahead of the historians. And this is why the empty chair in Chicago said so much.
Donald Trump currently controls the White House. He commands the American military. It's insane, I know. He dominates the news. He can summon cameras almost anywhere he goes. But Obama had the room and the world.
Yep, Obama had Clinton, Bush, and Biden. He had Merkel and Trudeau. He had artists, community leaders, and thousands of ordinary people gathered around an institution designed to outlast him.
And he didn't have to pay any of them to come. Listen, power is not simply the ability to force people to look at you. Real power is whether people still choose to stand beside you when you no longer control what happens to them.
Trump may win individual fights. He may extract concessions from Canada. Hey, he may announce another deal, throw another celebration, and attach his name to another building. But he has lost something that cannot be restored with gold letters or a huge ballroom. He has lost the willingness of allies to believe that America's word survives beyond the next presidential mood swing. 4 days apart, the world saw two visions of America. One was a public center asking citizens to participate in democracy. The other was a cage match on the White House lawn. Which one will define America when people look back on this period? The center or the cage?
And for Canadians, the harder question is this. Can we ever again build our future around an American political system that swings between those two images? Drop your thoughts in the comments because we really want to hear from you.
And if you enjoyed this, don't forget to give it a like, give it a share, and give it a hype so other people can participate in the conversation as well.
Check out the link in the pinned comment below because we've been writing some pretty spicy Substacks. And we will see you tomorrow, everyone.
Thanks for watching, everybody. Ciao for now.